Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the host and the founder of the Rise Above Justice Movement and the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast. Today, I will give a viewer discretion is advised due to the nature of the topics that we'll be discussing. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. I am excited to sit down and talk with two incredible human beings that are doing some deeply impactful work. And, without further ado, Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Uh, Thank you. So you go by Zachary or Zach?
Either way is perfectly fine
Or
with me. Just you can call me whatever you want. Just don't
either
forget to
way.
call me for dinner time. But feel free to introduce yourself and let everybody know a little bit about your background and why you do this work that you are doing.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Andrew Herrera. I'm the president of Herrera Strategy. We're a progressive public affairs firm based in Chicago, and we represent the Illinois the Illinois Coalition for Human Rights on a few different campaigns down here in Springfield, where we're working to address the major human rights issues of our day, including the genocide in Gaza, and also the uh, the attacks that we're having on our civilian population here, from DHS and all of that. And I've how did I get here? I've been an organizer for about 15 years. Did a lot of organizing in Chicago, electoral organizing at the neighborhood level, and uh, and then during the pandemic, kind of made a switch over. I'd worked in the public relations realm for a long time. That was my day job. I've been organizing in a pretty serious way at nights and weekends, and I kind of got to a point during the pandemic where it felt pretty empty, kind of selling Coca-Cola and other consumer products while the world felt like it was ending, and um, and it also felt like I was spending the most of my hours working against what I was doing in all of my free time. So found a way, fortunately, to transition into working in movement work full time, and we've been doing this for going on 6 years now. So it's been, I always feel like it's a privilege to be able to do this work and to be able to help people. And Yeah, excited to be here to talk about some of the stuff we're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Megan. Hello, my friend. So great to connect with you.
Hello, hello. I'm Megan. As Zach described me, I am like a thorn in everybody's side. I hate describing myself. I don't know how to describe myself, but I'm a content creator. For Illinois Coalition for Human Rights, I'm a policy and advocacy coordinator, focusing on defending our civil liberties and
Mhm.
also work for Creator Congress. I organize creators. I don't really know how to explain that either, but just finding ways for us to be telling the stories of like the people, and how people
Mhm.
are, communities are organizing and people are fighting back and really trying to like amplify that narrative instead of what is usually coming from, like mainstream media or whatever. And before I kind of got into this, I was in tech for a while. I worked for Apple. And I think similarly to Andrew, it just felt like I was spending all day working against what I actually cared about and what I was doing in my free time. So
Mhm.
once I had kids and I was on maternity leave, I just was like, I have free time now. I'm gonna try to start doing this thing. So now here I am doing this thing.
And you also went from Texas to Illinois too,
I
and
did.
you um you're gonna hate that I'm gonna bring this up, but you were also arrested in the the Texas People's house, essentially,
Capital. Yeah.
and I remember seeing that on Instagram because it kind of blew up a little bit, and it did because it's a big deal, right? And I know you hate whenever I bring it up, but it's just so interesting that the freedom of speech, right, and literally the freedom of assembly, and it's so just looking at the way that things are going, it's not a surprise, right? But I just want to add that part in there because yeah. Anywho, so
Yeah.
you're fighting a
Well,
separate battle
talk about
now.
that. To talk about that, I feel like that's like a good example of what I do because it's not like I just like showed up to the Capitol
Mm-hmm.
for like a protest, which is kind of the
Mhm.
way it was framed in the media. I
Mhm.
was really a part of organizing creators around the quorum break and working with
Mhm.
legislators to help change the narrative because I didn't like the way the House Democratic Caucus was uh, their narrative. I didn't like it, and I knew a lot of legislators didn't. So I was like, well, let's change the narrative.
Mhm.
But then when they were coming back from the quorum break, I knew that people would feel kind of deflated because they liked how the legislate, like they
Mhm.
were like, the Democrats are holding it down. And I was like, well, they're not holding it down anymore. But then when Nicole Collier, the representative who refused to sign the
Mhm.
slip that made it so that DA, who was it? I don't know, Capitol Police had to be on them at all times. She was refusing to sign that slip. And I was like, okay, so she's like taking the resistance and keeping it going. So now like we have to somehow take the resist, like we have to like build this thing where people
Mhm.
realize like everyone can plug in somewhere. So then I was like, well, I'm gonna go and like tell them they need to release her or else I'm not going anywhere until they do. But it's like, how do we like kind of obviously I cared about and there were like a couple of other people with me, but there's like so much work that goes into a moment that people are like, this is just a viral moment, but it's actually like there's so much background organizing. There were like so many group chats with 30 creators who were, I was like, if I get arrested, you guys better make sure I go viral because like I want to get out of jail as soon as possible. Like there, but there's so much organizing behind like this moment. It's not like I was like, I'm just gonna go to jail and it's gonna be so much fun. I was like getting all my ducks in a row, and it was a part of a whole narrative that we were building, you know.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's like that's a good example of what I do.
It
Um,
is. It's a perfect example, and it kind of, it gives a little bit of that backstory. And so let's kind of like dive in a little bit and talk about the anti-BDS laws in Illinois, which I know framed from 2015, right? So let's kind of dive in and kind of explain to people what an anti-BDS law actually is, because there's also like, I think you stated like 30 something states that kind of like follow suit or something like that, or like a certain number of states. But let's kind of talk about a little bit of the backstory about what the anti BDS laws are. Andrew, if you want to kind of jump in and talk here just for a second, um, or Megan, whichever one of you want to answer that, and kind of give a backstory on specifically Illinois, but also just across the country about these anti BDS laws and what it actually really prohibits, quote unquote prohibits, and yeah, just kind of give a little bit of a backstory about that.
Yeah, so I think we should be careful with the anti-BDS framing because it really is the framing that kind of the APAC alliance side
Mm-hmm.
came up with. Not that there's anything wrong with the BDS movement. I think it's a great movement. Um, but so what BDS is the boycott, divest, and sanction movement to as a form of nonviolent protest against to end the apartheid in Israel, which has developed into a genocide in Gaza and worsened as the apartheid in the West Bank and other parts. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so the it's just called the APAC lobby for as shorthand. What they've really been successful in doing is framing the BDS movement as an kind of like a needlessly anti-Israeli movement that's also kind of like coded anti-Semitic and all the bad things. And it's something like they don't actually want peace, right? They don't care about a two-state solution. Like these people, like they want to see Israel erased from the map. It's erasure and all these kinds of things. And it's kind of, when people come up with these things, and they're kind of telling on themselves. Um, and so the but it's kind of absurd on its face because the most successful BDS movement that anybody's seen really in a modern age is the BDS movement against South Africa, against apartheid South Africa, which famously was the kind of the precipitating campaign to end apartheid in South Africa. And it's something
Mm-hmm.
that the advocates for Palestinian human rights have tried to replicate, right? Um, and the thing that happened, that what made the BDS campaign so successful in South Africa was not only the the economics of it, where there was a cost to everything, but also the fact that there was this global shame that came with the campaign. That being a white South African anywhere in the world became a shameful thing, and people were like, oh, like, oh my God, like you guys have such terrible policies. You must be a horrible racist. And that shame, as much as anything, led isolated South Africa, and at the end of the day, led to I think one of the great civil rights victories of the 20th century, where you see pretty much a bloodless revolution, right? I mean, there was always some conflict, some strife, but at the end of the day, there was a peace and reconciliation process, and there was no great bloodshed. And South Africa continued as a country. By contrast, the Israelis have really done a good job of vilifying BDS and saying that somehow this peaceful campaign is actually secretly violent and secretly boycotting somebody is going to lead to their erasure and some kind of either cultural or actual genocide. And so that's the framing that came into like 2014 when Netanyahu dedicated, and Megan found this information, which I hadn't seen before. $25 million he dedicated in 2014 to run what they called an anti-BDS campaign across the United States. And what they decided to do, and we know from some guys who were in the room at the time on that side of things, that they knew that at some point um, Israel was going to lose the popular support of Americans. It was going to do too much and go too far. And they just wouldn't have the popular support they'd been counting on. And you have to remember that this is right during the era, like the Obama presidency. This is toward the end of Obama's presidency, and Obama and Netanyahu had a very fraught relationship, where Netanyahu came to Congress, spoke to Congress at the Republicans' invitation, and kind of disrespected Obama, like our president. Um, from DC at the invitation of his political rivals. It was like an unprecedented thing. It was a huge slap in the face. And Obama hated Netanyahu. So they saw the writing on the wall that says this relationship's going to break. We're not going to have the two-party support that we've always had. We need to create an insurance policy. And the insurance policy here was going state by state and creating a series of laws that tied American policymakers and the American people to the kind of the national security interests of Israel. And that's what happened with these anti-BDS laws that started in Illinois. I'm going a little long here, but they started in Illinois, and it, uh, Illinois is an important place because we have a lot of very large Zionist institutions, JUF, and others are either based or have a big presence here, like the ADL. APAC is a very strong presence in Illinois. Um, and so with all of that, there's a lot of financial resources, there's a lot of political muscle. And so we see this, but it's also the fifth largest state in the country, right? The fifth largest economy in the country. It's a major state, and it's Illinois, California, and New York where you see a lot of these, a lot of the same kind of power structures. And so they were able to win here. And the thing that's kind of crazy about it to me is that they ran it under a Republican governor, Bruce Rauner. They ran it in a moment where the legislature could barely pass the budget. Like Bruce Rauner famously went almost 3 years without passing a budget. Um, and so I think this was actually the moment when they were still in the budget stalemate. And so they were able to pass this before they could pass like the state government functioning, right? Baseline. Because Rauner was trying to bankrupt the state so he could kill all the unions. So that was still moving, but we could vote for this. And they voted for it unanimously. So a few people walked out, but it was a unanimous vote, which I think is, still a great shame for the state. Um, and At least in the House. And so it moves through, and then all of a sudden, you guys may be familiar with ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. ALEC picked up the bill and ran it in as many states as it could. And like ALEC does, it tests things in different places. So sometimes it goes a little too far, they get struck down by a court. Sometimes, this or that, I wasn't able to pass in legislature. But they're pretty successful in getting, I believe, there's 37 other states to pass some version of this. But really, there's what I would consider like seven other core states that have passed something that's similar enough to the Illinois anti-BDS law. And so what I like to call it is like the Illinois anti-boycott law. Um, it is easier for people everyone knows what a boycott is. So these are similar enough to the Illinois anti-boycott law that when Illinois acts to like when the law is activated, these seven other states pile in, and it creates a huge effect. Um, and at the risk of going even longer, I think it's worthwhile explaining how the bill works, how the law works. Do you want me to go into that, or do you want to?
Yeah, feel free to do so. Yes.
So the way the law works is it says that I'll speak specifically to the Illinois law, and all the others have slight differences. But if a company decides to, in any way, the language is something like limit its effectively, if any company limits their economic relationship with Israel, an Israeli company, or an Israeli occupied territory for a quote unquote political reason, but it doesn't define political. So, anything can be interpreted as being political without it being defined. And so you open up the door for almost any reason, being the reason that the law is triggered, and that at the point that it's triggered, the state has to divest all of its public pension dollars from that company. So the clearest example of this is Unilever, where Ben and Jerry's is a wholly owned subsidiary of Unilever. Ben and Jerry's, everyone knows, beloved ice cream company founded by two kooky guys from Vermont. Um, and they also have a kind of a human rights like charter or whatever you want to call it, a policy that they're very consistent about. And so they decided after review that operating their stores in the West Bank was contrary to their human rights policy because of all the things that were happening in the West Bank. And when they closed those stores, um, because they were a wholly owned subsidiary, you couldn't withdraw pension funds from Ben and Jerry's, but you could withdraw from Unilever. And Unilever is a blue chip stock. Blue chip stock. It's one of the biggest companies in the entire world. And because of that reason, it's actually invested in by many state pension funds because it's seen as a very safe bet. And so we initiated the process of divesting all of our state money from Unilever. Now we don't know exactly how much that was, but the guy who was the main kind of antagonist that set this whole thing up, Richard Goldberg, right, Megan? He said at the time that um, it was roughly equivalent to the New Jersey pension fund. I believe the New Jersey pension fund, the New York Times reported at the time, about 185 million withdrawal. We're talking about very serious money here. So Illinois goes first. These other states follow us, all because Ben and Jerry's closed like a handful of stores in the West Bank. Uh, and so now, you've got $185 million in New Jersey, roughly equivalent from Illinois. And you've got Texas, Florida, New York, a few other states follow suit. And so you're talking about a total fiscal impact that could exceed $1 billion, um, all for closing, a couple little ice cream stores. And so you end up having this extreme chilling effect on free speech, because what effectively happens is that if a company actually pays attention to this kind of BDS campaign, that people across the world rising up and saying, hey, what's going on is wrong, and we should not be supporting it with our dollars, and we're going to engage in this form of nonviolent protest, the state of Illinois is taking the lead and bringing other states with it to say, okay, well, if you actually listen to those guys and you apply your human rights policy, and you engage in this form of nonviolent protest, we're going to punish you not with a little fine, but like $1 billion off your bottom line. And to give you a sense of how impactful this was, when the state of Illinois announced this, the Unilever share price dropped from about $50 to $40. That's a 20% drop to one of the biggest companies in the world. I don't even know how much, like what the dollar impact was, like what it wiped off their bottom line. And then when they actually ended up selling off Ben and Jerry's, they spun off their entire ice cream business. And as soon as that happened, it rebounded by 5%. And so there's a lot of things at play here. Like we could talk more about it, just in terms of like the effect on pension holders. This is actually hurting our pension investments. And Illinois is one of the lowest funded pensions in the whole country. We're only about 45% funded. This is something that's stifling free speech. This is something that is supporting Israeli, basically the impunity of the state of Israel, so that it can continue committing a genocide without even the barest economic consequences. And it's also communicating, it's sending a very clear signal that there is this kind of Zionist political hegemony in the United States, that it cannot be contested, and that any efforts to do so is doomed to fail. And so that's why it's so important now that we're working to not just kind of turn back the clock on this particular policy, but really start to roll the ball the other way, and make sure that that we're raising awareness of these bills, these policies that exist across the country, and getting people engaged to really start asking the questions like, why are we sacrificing our public pensions and the welfare of our people to safeguard the ability of Israel to commit a genocide with impunity?
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, thank you so much for giving us that backstory and that background on that, because I think it's I will cut this part out, but I just ripped out my headphones. I'll cut this part out, don't worry. You didn't see that on video. You don't want to see that, but again, thank you for giving us the background on that. And I think this is an incredibly crucial topic to be talking about, especially right now, right? And I'm looking at campaigns that are running, in different elections across the country, specifically like Greg Stoker and Kat in Illinois. But there's a lot of other campaigns that are really bringing this to the forefront that have been endorsed by, like Track APAC. But I want to, Megan, I want to shift into you and kind of like think about in like your experience, like what are you seeing? And what I mean by what you're seeing is what are you hearing? What are you seeing? Kind of give us a little bit of a backstory on like what you're seeing on social media. Because I know you're involved in like 1.5 million group chats, 1.5 million things. But what are you kind of seeing around this genocide in Gaza? And like, what are you seeing? Because I know you've also been involved with like the flotillas too, and kind of like, tracking that and watching that. But I really want to kind of hear about what you're seeing on the ground.
Yeah. So I mean, like just last week, earlier this week, Axios reported that the DNC is refusing to release their autopsy on why Kamala's race failed. And we all know it's because of Gaza. We all know that the Democratic Party is not representing its own constituents when it comes to Gaza. We've seen a genocide live stream. Like, I don't have to repeat all of these points, but people are really tired, even on the right, people are really tired of the Israeli government having more rights than us. And like, I think I just like said that in a Threads post a couple days ago. Someone said like, Israel has the right to exist. And I'm like, we can't even get to the agreement that humans have human rights. Why are we talking about a state's rights? Like it's actually just so disconnected from reality. When it came to the flotillas, like I was in contact with Greg Stoker almost every day to, make sure like Lloyd Doggett knew that he had a constituent going. Lloyd Doggett ended up like calling his family every day. Lloyd Doggett actually has taken APAC money too. So I will say it's not like everybody who's taken APAC money is like unmovable. He got Greg Stoker back earlier than anybody else, but there was, I used to be in the DNC group chats. I think I left shortly after you did, because there was one point where I was like, guys, there is a boat of like 12 US veterans heading to Gaza to break the siege with baby formula and baby food, and our State Department is saying nothing. And if they are unwilling to protect our own veterans, what does that say for any of us? Like, we were all absolutely fucked. And like, everyone in the group chat was silent. And I'm like, did you hear what I just said or no? Like, but then, my own separate flotilla chat had tons of people who cared a lot. And it is like this confusing cognitive dissonance where it's like, do you actually realize, like, if our State Department is willing to let Israel violate international law, unlawfully detain people who are bringing in aid when children are starving to death. Like at that point, we had like a count of how many babies had died of starvation, and like these veterans who have sacrificed their lives for this country are doing this, and the State Department looks the other way. They were designated as terrorists. They were tortured. They were had to drink out of toilet water. Medications were withheld, and our State Department did absolutely nothing. Like, what does that mean for any of us when we constantly see like Israel does act with complete impunity? I think even people who aren't even like as in it as I am see that. And even like my right-wing brother is to the point where he's like, he's like, this is actually insane. Like, I hate Donald Trump. I never thought he would say that, but it's like, it's because of the Epstein files and because of what they're seeing Israel get away with, all of our tax dollars, like just blank check all the time. And because of that, we have seen so much support for the anti-BDS repeal here. I mean, in the 72-hour like witness slips, so it was assigned to like a committee, the bill was assigned to a committee, and then when it's assigned to a committee, people who live in Illinois can like state their position officially on the bill, whether they're for or against it. And we had over 4,000 people write in that they're for the bill that would repeal this, with 3,000 who are against it. And that's like a huge, huge, huge deal. Like, this is something that people are just absolutely tired of. And I think you see that, like I said, with why Kamala's campaign lost. They just like could not get on board. You look at the numbers, it's super majority agrees that there is a genocide going on and we need to stop funding it. And so it is this like the frustrating thing where it's like, why can't you just listen to us? And why is this stronghold of like the Zionist hegemony, as Andrew says, like what is it and how can we break it and why is it such a stronghold? And I mean, my thing is it's actually that AIPAC to me is not the Israel lobby, it is the military industrial complex lobby, and Israel is just like the mechanism through which they are able to do all of that, but we don't have to get into all of that. But I mean, yeah, this bill has overwhelming support. People are tired of this game. Like it is, we are all, cost of living is really high. People can't own homes. Daycare is expensive. Groceries are expensive. And yet we're sending unlimited aid to Israel while they're committing genocide. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what what
It
I'm saying.
does, and it brings a perspective to why "quote unquote" America First is absolute bullshit. Because America First to me does not mean sending our tax dollars literally to Israel to commit a absolute genocide. And I will be the first to say I was ignorant to the fact and I was denying that it was a genocide whenever it first came around because I was blindsided for years. Israel is like this big, they're doing great work, they're doing this or doing that. And I
Only
was kind of like, I was
democracy.
gaslit into that and to believe that. And then my partner is like, oh, absolutely fuck not. And she was like, no, this is what's actually happening. This is what's going on. And then Megan, you have also pulled me into that direction. But this isn't even just like pulling into the direction because this should not be a controversy. It shouldn't be a controversial topic. Genocide is genocide. Look what's happening in Congo, Sudan, is, all these places, right? Because genocide is genocide. And how is that putting America first? America first would mean that our veterans would come home and they would actually have a home to go back to. You cannot say that you give a damn about children whenever you're literally bombing children overseas. You can't sit here and tell me that we are America first whenever we're not. We are not the United States of America. We're the United States of Israel because Israel has such this grip and this hold that is so dangerous. And Megan, you've really opened my eyes a lot. I want to say thank you for that. I don't tell you that enough, but you really helped me kind of like shift like my thinking on it because it's just literally common sense. And I want to talk a little bit about, a big topic right now is Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, like look what's happening with Congress, releasing the Epstein files, but they're redacted, and then Pam Bondi's bullshit of a hearing. I painfully and admittedly sat through the entire hearing, and I don't know how I did it, but it took a lot for me. I literally flipped the table. I scared the shit out of my poodle. Anybody out there who has a poodle, they're afraid of their own damn shadow. But I literally flipped my tray that I have in my bedroom because I was so irritated. And just knowing the fact that Pam Bondi served as the Attorney General of Florida from 2019 or from 2011 to 2019. And while Jeffrey Epstein was still doing what he's doing and all of his accomplices, and then looking at his connections across the world, connections in Israel, connections in the UK, connections like literally everywhere, and thinking about this, Megan, what do you think is going to happen during the midterms? Do you believe that the genocide in Gaza is going to be a deciding factor for voters in the midterms? And then also kind of looking into 2018, Andrew, I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well, but let's jump into Megan really quick, and then we'll go back to Andrew. But what do you think is going to happen during the midterms? What are you kind of seeing as like those deciding factors whenever people are going to the polls and looking at candidates? What are going to be those deciding factors? 2024 was, Gaza, but we have a lot of things kind of going into this. But what do you think is going to happen during the midterms, and then let's look ahead to the 2028 presidential election as well.
Well, so I think what's hard about this question is I don't know that we're going to have fair elections in the
Mm-hmm.
midterms. So like
Mm-hmm.
that scares me. I also think that all of the issues, whether people see it or not, it's all one issue. It's this issue of
Mhm.
like a system built to protect the people in power,
Mhm.
whether it's Jeffrey Epstein or whether it is Israel's genocide, and the military industrial complex and everything that benefits from the genocide. So to me, it's one issue. I see more people coming around to it. I think before, I mean, you look at November, we had like a blue wave in every single, we keep having these, who is Afton Bain in Tennessee out of nowhere?
Tennessee.
She flipped them. Like we're seeing a lot of things flip. But then I get nervous thinking like, oh, it's just going to keep happening because, like I said, we don't even know if we're going to have fair elections. Today, Donald Trump released an executive order saying that he
Mhm.
is now in charge of elections. What does that even mean? I don't know. I think being in Illinois, realizing how much of a grip Zionism has here too, like it's actually pretty wild. So I don't know if we're going to see this massive, like, I think there's like the blue wave. That's great. We need progress where there's progress, but then we also don't need just a blue wave. We actually need progressive candidates who are willing to not just say that they're standing up to power, but who can't be influenced by these other forces. And like, I don't know. Like, I really don't know. I don't know. I don't like to get my hopes up. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a very valid point is, one thing that, oh God, see, I'm tongue twisted because I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Executive orders don't overpower like laws, right?
But
And it's
tell
one of
Donald
those,
Trump that.
we know how this authoritarian, like, we know he's trying to be a dictator. We know this. And it's very dangerous to kind of like sit back and say, like, oh, I'm in charge of all elections now. Yeah, no, that's not how it works. The state rights do still exist. Now, speaking of states' rights, and Andrew, I'm curious to know, how is like JB Pritzker responding to like this BDS like movement kind of happening?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that Governor Pritzker has been cautious around this policy. I think
Hmm.
it's a difficult policy for him. And if you think I'm being cautious with my words, it's because we very much need the governor
Yes.
to be good with this. Um, and what I will say, what we're very encouraged by is the fact that he has not come out against this in any way.
Hmm.
He's come out with statements to the effect of, in Illinois, we follow the laws and will continue to follow the law, basically implying that he's going to allow this process to play itself out, and that if the law gets to his desk, if the bill gets to his desk, passed by both chambers, I expect that he will not block it. So I think that that puts us in a better position than some other states. I would say that.
So there's a little bit of optimism there, and I have to say, JB Pritzker is actually, I'm gonna keep my thought out of this. I live in Kansas, so obviously, we have a Democratic governor, but we have a supermajority of GOP, and there's a lot happening here in Kansas. We're on the headlines, and not for good reason right now. People that are listening can go on to Google and you can find out what's happening in Kansas. It's a lot, and it's very unconstitutional. But Andrew, what's your thoughts about the midterm elections and kind of like what you're seeing in regards to like these candidates that are running in Illinois, but also just across the country? And I'm feeling a little sense of optimism because I'm seeing a lot more like really, really, really progressive candidates begin to run, but it's also, I don't know. I just feel this little sense of optimism, but I don't want to be too optimistic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So I'm an Illinois guy, maybe a Midwestern guy at most, but I really try to stay out of national politics,
Hmm.
just because I like to focus where I can have an impact.
Yep.
Um, and I will say that there's a saying in Illinois in political circles that there are red states, there's blue states, and then there's Illinois. And I think a big reason for that being that we're the opposite. We have a supermajority Democratic legislature, and because of that, we have the kind of the full political spectrum within the Democratic Party here. Um, and it makes navigating legislature kind of an interesting process. Uh, and we also have four congressional seats up well, 4 House seats and 1 Senate seat. And so what always happens whenever there's movement like that, you get there's a huge ripple effect. So we get a bunch of down ballot races where people are vacating their seats to run for something or to retire, what have you. Um, and so we have a fairly unprecedented number of seats up that are either open seats or contested for the first time. And I think there's a lot of really promising races. And I think that the state legislature has changed in a very positive direction over the past 10 years that have made it possible to have many more exciting policy conversations in Springfield than we could have imagined in the time before that. So there's, I think, big picture, at least in Illinois, a lot of reasons to be hopeful. I think the big challenge for us is that frankly, the federal government isn't following the law. And what do you do with that? Um, we're not playing by the rules anymore. And then we have, congressional Democrats, unfortunately caved and allowed Trump to get away with whatever it was, like $85 billion to ICE. Um, and now they're holding the line, but they already have $85 billion that they're using to spend what they spent like $25 billion. I'm not being exact on these numbers, I don't have them in front of me, but something like $25 billion to buy warehouses that they're going to be putting people in. Um, and a lot of the work that I do is on immigrant justice work, and we see um, people literally being tortured to death in these prisons. We're seeing, one of the ones that sticks with me is a woman in Louisiana was routinely raped in a utility closet so that she could be allowed to see her children who were visiting her while she was in detention. A blind uh, refugee was just released, but without his walking stick, or seeing, I don't know what they call it, but um, basically without the support that he needed, 5 miles away from anything, and he ended up dying on the road. Like it's not just illegal; it's inhumane, and it's I mean, it reminds you of the things that you're hearing out of Israel, in the occupied territories, where people are being again like raped to death. Like you're like things that you remember from the history books from the Holocaust. Like these are things that I heard. That I grew up in Northbrook in a very very Jewish community, and I grew up with all the stories of the Holocaust all around me, and you hear the echoes of that, and then you look around here, and there's a Tamala lady 2 blocks down from my house who just was disappeared by masked men at 5 o'clock in the morning. And you've got these pictures of people so bravely turning out with their whistles and getting shot by either real bullets or pepper bullets and all these things. And the response that we're getting from so many of our legislators is like, you guys are doing great, keep at it. And that's so insufficient. It just is so incredibly insufficient to meet this moment. And I think one of the things that keeps me awake at night and keeps a lot of people, a lot of political actors in the state awake at night, is the president has also said, he says he runs elections, but he also said, well, I can't promise that we're not going to have ICE near polling sites. And I've been around politics long enough that I've seen a lot of shady things happen. And one of the routine shady things that you see happen, if something shady is going to happen, they do it like within 2 weeks of election day, because then the courts are too slow to react. And then by the time the courts react, the election's already happened, and you lock that in because the courts almost never overturn an election. Um, and so they have the ability to do this at an unprecedented scale now. And even just the idea that maybe the feds will be at polling sites may be enough to keep people home when they're dragging people out of their daycares, in hospitals, and attacking elected officials, who are just demanding warrants, like so like that to me is the thing that, okay, so we pick up the House. That seems pretty clear that we're gonna pick up the House, knock on wood, in DC. Maybe we get the Senate, maybe not. Um, but then there's been so much damage done. And I think that almost the hardest thing to reverse is this idea that when it comes to the impunity um, of DHS, right, and our total inability to stop them from breaking the law, when it comes to the absolute turn of public opinion against Israel and the Israeli genocide, and the fact that nothing that changes in public opinion is actually shifting policy. And then when it comes to this anti-BDS legislation, we talk about people, the people overwhelmingly agree, Republicans and Democrats, that any anti-boycott legislation, any effort to restrict boycotts, is anti-free speech and is something that shouldn't be done. Um, and despite that, we've got this in 37 states. Nobody wants it. And so the overwhelming message on all of these things is that we don't live in a democracy, is that we don't live in a place where the people rule and we can create accountability for those who serve us. Um, and that's the thing that we really need to push back on, and we need to win these fights now, and we need to show people that government can do good things and isn't just a liability. Because if we don't do that, then we're going to continue to fall apart. And like the key to fascism is individualism. Like once we are too individualized and we do not believe in our ability to act as a collective, um, then and to have common projects, uh, then then we're screwed, right? And that's when strongmen take over, and that's when you have the Donald Trumps and you have the Elon Musks and all these shitheads. Um, so we do need to be able to come together. We do need to be able to reinvigorate our democracy, and we do need to be able to show that we we do have power as people. And so I think what's most encouraging to me is less the people who are running and more the sustained energy in the people and the people who are turning out, the activists, and not just activists, like just people who are paying attention for the first time. They're really understanding that we're in trouble. And if people can keep that up and they can get their loved ones to pay attention, then I really do believe that we can turn a page. But it's going to be a generational fight, and people have to be ready for that.
I want to highlight something that you just said, a generational fight. Absolutely. And the generational trauma that kind of like led us into this aspect too, and led us into this point is incredibly crucial to highlight too. So thank you for that. Um, I want to kind of shift a little bit because we were talking about Epstein, and I know we're kind of coming up on time here, but this will kind of be like one of the next to last questions. There is going to be a new commission, or potentially a new commission, being formed in Illinois around Epstein. So I would love for you to kind of talk about that. I would love to kind of talk about what that could look like, and kind of what the momentum is going into that, and kind of think about that. And also kind of I'm actually genuinely curious, what are Epstein's ties to Illinois? And I'm just genuinely curious. So I would love for you to kind of, either one of you, to kind of jump in and talk about that a little bit. Um, so we'll kind of talk about what this commission could look like and why it's incredibly crucial, and hopefully other states will follow suit too. Because yeah, he had a lot of connections. I found out that
Do,
he had a
do
lot
you
of
want me
connections. I figured out he had a lot of connections to Kansas City, Megan. Oh God, yeah, he spent some time.
to?
Him and Ghislaine spent some time here in Kansas City. The credit card records don't lie. So
That's wild. So I don't know
That's
enough
just wild.
about the bill that's going to be dropped, but I'll say when it comes to connections, I have heard that it's possible that Lex Wessner was running the ring from Chicago, and that
mm,
possibly Trump was running the ring in New York City, alleged, not confirmed
mhm.
legal jargon stuff. But I know that there are survivors in Chicago. They haven't been named, but they've been referenced in um, different actions that advocacy groups have taken. But I mean, Chicago is a very, I don't know. I am curious about the Les Wexner angle, and if that's just hearsay or if that will come up. So don't know, but I will let Andrew explain more.
Um, yeah, I think the thing is that we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. But what we do know is that in general, we're seeing the federal government uh, be delinquent in its responsibilities to the people. That they are not following the law that they themselves passed. Um, and and we're seeing this. I mean, we're seeing an outcry for transparency on this issue from uh, at least at the public level across the political spectrum. Um, and it's a major liability for Republicans. Um, I think that the Democratic Party has been right at the national level to seize on it, although I think sometimes reluctantly. And I think it makes sense for the states to be thinking about what are the different ways in which they should be leaning in. So I think it's really great that that Illinois is planning and or at least contemplating creating this commission um, to look into this. And I think it kind of mirrors actually what the governor has with the Illinois Accountability Commission, which is tracking the abuses by DHS in the state. And really, we don't know quite where we'll lead. We do know that, for example, Epstein's brother has a nonprofit that's connected to Chicago Public Schools. That to me is very concerning, as a father of two small children and or just a human being, honestly. But you know, and also from what we've already seen in the Epstein files and the emails that have been released, um, what we're looking at is not just a human trafficking ring. It's not like something that was like running through New York City or like from New York to the Caribbean or anything like that. It was a global operation that had like the most wild, the far-reaching tendrils where, involved in the Iran-Contra affair and involved in this and involved in that. And a lot of the crimes were financial in nature. Chicago's a major financial center. So there's every possibility and likelihood that um, there have been some financial crimes that were committed in a way that would allow Illinois to investigate them and hold people to account. And I also think that one of the really important takeaways from the Epstein files so far is the level of complicity that so many people had. Like there is no way that something that was this big was not known by a whole class of people. I've been seeing the term the Epstein class floating around more. And I think that's right. I think there is a class of people that believe themselves beyond accountability. And I think that's an extraordinarily dangerous thing for any society when you have a class of people who actually believe themselves and show themselves to be above accountability. And so I think that, what the intention here is to do is to really use the resources of the state, and hopefully other states follow suit. Um, and investigate what was happening within their jurisdictional bounds, what they can look into, and even if there are things that maybe they can't prosecute, if they can unearth information and name and shame people who either participated in this or who allowed it to go on, even just knowing about it. Because I think that the Epstein files and the what that man was able to get away with for so long is an indictment on our whole society. And it's something that we all have to act together to um, be able to know that we have um, fully adjusted so that everyone who was harmed by it can heal and move on, and so that we also can have faith that we don't live in a world that tolerates such things. And I think going back to my earlier point about um, the anti-democratic messages that we're getting, I mean, that's another clear one is that people really want the Epstein files released, and they're just not being that clear majoritarian um, sentiment or deep feeling is not being respected by many elected leaders.
And we oftentimes hear, well, what about the Democrats that are in these files? And I always say, like, I really don't give a fuck, and excuse my language, but I really do not give a single fuck about what party somebody belongs to. If they're in those files, they deserve to be prosecuted. Regardless, it does not matter what party somebody belongs to. I genuinely do not care about that. All I care is about justice for these survivors. And I say that as a survivor of sexual assault and domestic violence myself. Like there's nothing more than I love to see, and it's not just because I created a movement that's Rise Above Justice movement, because it's not just a movement, it's a mission, to amplify the voices that the mainstream and the corporate media refuse to highlight and refuse to talk about. Megan knows this better than anybody else. She's heard me talk about this like numerous times, and me and Megan will be we'll be texting back and forth, just talking shit about everything that's going on. But it's just how me and Megan are.
But I mean, what keeps me motivated, I really don't know. I think it is my own stubbornness. Like I would love to say it's that I just have this like, pure whatever. But when something is wrong, it just is wrong and that's it. And I'm not gonna shut up about it or stop working to fix it until it's right, until it's made right. And I think like for me, a lot of it is that I don't well, I love to win, so and I'm very competitive, but also to me, winning in is even as small as like, are we just we're talking about things that 5 years ago nobody was talking about. That's progress. Like just being able to move the needle a teeny little bit, um, wherever we can. Like I'm not one to lose hope because we lose at a fight that's in front of us because this is an intergenerational fight. Like the people have always been fighting against power for generations and generations. And I often think of Miriam Kaba, who says hope is a discipline. Um, and it's not something that you feel. It's something that in the way that she framed it was like her ancestors kept fighting for freedom even when they were enslaved. They were fighting for a world that didn't exist at the time, and there's no way that you can continue to fight that if you're not disciplined to do that. So like I often think about that, like this is just a discipline and I'm fighting for a world that I hope one day that we can see, but I know it's not going to happen in my lifetime. It might not even happen in my kids' lifetime, but if we can just like make an incremental small, keep the discipline to make those small changes, like I'm just going to keep at it.
Absolutely. And I think I feel the same way that you do. I know I'm very stubborn. And I think it's the Leo in me that definitely comes out at certain times. I know we're in Pisces season, but Leo season is coming up, at some point very, very soon.
I'm
But
an Aries, so very stubborn.
it definitely shows. But but Andrew, welcome back. I think your connection cut out for a little bit.
Yeah, I think
But
I let my battery get dangerously low, and the whole computer froze up.
the last question that I have for you is what keeps you motivated during times of uncertainty? Because, like as me and Megan were saying, there's a lot, that keeps us up at night, right? And a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of tears shed, a lot of, blood and sweat, like literally. Um, but what keeps you motivated in times of uncertainty, and what are you looking forward to in just either the near future or, coming up? Like, what's something that just keeps you motivated and keeps you going?
You know, like I mentioned earlier, I've been doing this for a minute now, and when I was before I had kids, you know, a big motivator for me was kind of because fuck you. Uh, by that I mean like I've always hated bullies. I've always hated people who think they're better than anybody else. Um, and and you as soon as you deal with power of any kind, you meet people like that every day. Um, and so I always felt like, man, you might be bigger than me, but like I'll at least give you a bloody nose, and so that's always kind of been the mentality. And as I've gotten, a little more experience with this and better at navigating, like I can give more, bigger and scarier people bloody noses. Um, but now it's different having kids, because I still have that impulse in me, right? Like I still um I don't want anyone to think they can take advantage of me or anybody else. Um, but there's also the element of I want my kids to live in a better world. And it doesn't mean a perfect world, right? Um, I want my kids to live in a world that they can also improve. And I believe a lot. Father Flegger, he's a Catholic priest on the South Side. He's a real fighter himself. And he told me a long time ago, he says, the what being a good Catholic is, and I don't know if I qualify as a good Catholic, but for him, he says being a good Catholic um is really focusing on making the room better every time you walk into it, right? Like just thinking about how you can make the room better and thinking at that scale. Um, and so, I guess the two parts to that are feeling like you just have to go on because you can't let the people who are actively trying to destroy the world win, and always remembering that they want you to feel alone. They want you to feel like it's hopeless. They want you to feel like there's nothing anyone can do, and that this is just the inevitable course of history. Um, and then if you give into that, you're letting them win. Um, and also that it's enough to walk into a room and you don't have to save the world every day or ever. You can just bring kindness to the people around you, and you can just act with you can just make that room better. Um, and and if you can do that and you don't let somebody push you around and push you over, I think that's the seed that can you know I'm trying to run with a seed metaphor, but that's the thing that can um, help build the seed that will help us grow a better world or whatever. And also, I think as other people see you do that, as people see people act with quiet courage, as people see people act with decency and dignity, that inspires them to do the same. And that's the kind of knock-on effect that we need to really um, uh, save our world, which is in such trouble right now.
Absolutely. No, I want to say thank you, Andrew, for speaking very candidly and, update, kind of letting everybody know, like, it's, there's so much to look forward to. And there's so much, that I think about. I'm a big history buff. So looking back at like Malcolm X and looking back at, like the younger Reverend Jesse Jackson and just thinking about everything that has come before our generations. I'll be 30 this year. So I was born in 96. But what did I grow up around? I grew up around war. I grew up around literally around war. My partner was born in 1999. Tomorrow is her 27th birthday. But
You
I
guys are
grew up
making me feel really old.
I
Same though.
age is nothing but a number though, and it's I
Happy birthday, Amelia. Happy birthday, Amelia.
yes. But I grew up around war. I remember watching on television 9/11, right? I was sitting on my mom's lap in our front room. I remember watching that. And I remember going to school that next year, and you just feel like this just somber feeling. And then thinking about the school shootings, this is something that hits very hard for me, but I won't go into too deep into it. But school shootings, I grew up around that. I grew up around violence. I became a survivor at the age of 17. Like, I moved to Minneapolis, went to my first Black Lives Matter protest. Megan, if you've been watching kind of like the news, you saw that Nikema Levy Armstrong, led a protest inside of a church because they found out that that pastor of that church is also the regional office director for the ICE office that's right there in St. Paul. But
Oh yeah, that was wild.
that's the first time, and that's also where like the Don Lemon charges are coming from as well, which he literally
Yeah.
didn't do a fucking thing. He was literally there to cover a protest. Don Lemon's not necessarily my favorite journalist, but at the same time, he's there literally doing the job. But the first time I ever attended a Black Lives Matter protest was that year that the verdict came down that they were not going to indict the officers that shot and killed Philando Castile outside the Minnesota State Fairgrounds. I think it's
Yep.
called Falcon Heights, Minnesota. But that was the first time I ever attended and felt like attended a Black Lives Matter protest and felt that sense of like power that community really has. And I think that's what's really driven me. I asked you guys what keeps you motivated. I think what keeps me motivated is, these conversations that we need to be having and highlighting these very important conversations and these important topics. But I think what really does keep me going is I feel a sense of an uprising. And I don't know what it's going to look like just yet. But I think people are starting to come around and they're starting to realize, hey, maybe these corporations aren't going to save us. Hey, maybe the mainstream media and the corporate media is not going to save us. Maybe I should listen to this independent journalist. Maybe I should listen to this. Maybe I should, vote for this candidate over this candidate and look at these campaign donations. And like, I think a lot of it is just that education piece and just showing people like, hey, this is what's truly happening. Listen to this conversation, listen to this, and bring those people together. And I love the idea of like what Mayor Mamdani did whenever he was running, and he did the reverse town halls. So instead of getting in front and talking to people, he would turn it and have people like talk directly to him. Like, what do you need from me as a candidate or as your mayor? Those reverse town halls seem to be very, very well put together. So I love that aspect of that. But anyway, without further ado, thank you both so much for coming on the podcast. Keep me updated. Let me know what's going on in Illinois. You guys have an open invite anytime you want to come back. And anytime there's something to amplify, feel free to reach out anytime. Is there anything else that either one of you wanted to share or kind of talk about, or how can people connect with you on the internet?
Yeah, I think just from a closing note for me is thank you so much for having us on and spotlighting this issue. And I think there is it's a complicated and nuanced thing, and it's intentional, and that complexity, people count on that to turn you away, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would really encourage folks, if they're not in Illinois, to look into if there is an anti-boycott law on the books in their state. The odds are there is. Um, and start looking into what are the kinds of yeah, if you're part of an activist network, if you're part of an organization, start looking at what needs to be done locally to get rid of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do believe that if we're able to pass this in Illinois, it's going to light a spark. It will be the spark that lights a fire to hopefully lead to a repeal in all of the other states as well. So if you're able, if you go to ilchr.org, it's like Illinois Coalition for Human Rights, ILCHR. Uh, you can make a donation, or if you live in Illinois, you can also fill out the our petition to contact your legislator.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things are extremely meaningful ways to contribute, and we really need everyone's support to be able to get this done.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Zach. Thanks so much for letting us come on. Always love talking to you. So,
Likewise, my friend, please take care of yourselves, and I will see you out there.
all right. Take care.
Alrighty. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you.